Yeah, when I was a boy, when I was first born in Texas, I used to think that in a way, I just kind of had this feeling that God didn't like me or something because I was born with some pretty severe birth defects and, well, I almost died 3 times before I was 5. And even though I was very young, I kind of had a feeling for what dying was, and I knew it wasn't a good thing. And it just seemed like I couldn't understand it. My brother was strong and healthy and, standard stock Scott Irish and, big arms, big strong back and, the apple of my dad's eye. And here I was, this weak, puny little misshapen thing, very small for my age, weak enough that there wasn't any girl in the class could whip me with one hand tied behind her back. And it just seemed like God didn't like me. And it was compounded by the fact that I was named Marion for an uncle that died when he was 3, and Eugene for another uncle that died when he was 3. And being just a kid, it just seemed to me that was kind of a death wish on the part of my family, that they really would be happier if they got rid of me. And it was just really depressing. And sometimes I'd even wonder, I guess, why I was born, because it just seemed like everything's so bad, Well, and, the environment. All the people in town they tended to be big guys, maybe not big, but, they were fat, which they used to think was big. And, they really confused big as being important versus being obese, But, which I think is still kind of a thing in some parts of Texas, some of the rural areas of Texas. And so you had these big husky guys, supposedly husky, most of them weren't, but they seemed husky, riding around on buckboards and riding their horses. And I disliked trying to ride anything because I was too weak to hold on. And I was, it was hard to do anything for any length of time because my lungs were badly shaped because of some of my birth defects. And so I tired very easily. And, in those days, the real measure of a man or even a boy was being able to do a full day's work and all that sort of stuff. And I wasn't even close. It did kind of set me in. Even then, I guess I was beginning to realize that if I was going to make it in this world, I'd have to do it with my brain, not with my brawn. So it did set me apart from the rest of the family because we were all Scotch-Irish day laborers, cowboys and trench diggers and stuff like that. And even as a really tiny little kid, I guess I knew my only hope was education, which was really very contrary to what to the family heritage. But anyway, I still muddle along. What else would you do? I was too young to even think about committing suicide. And all in all, it had its better side. My mother was very sweet to me at times, and my dad was kind of condescending and kind of ashamed of me, and I knew it. But at the same time, he was a good dad, very kind and thoughtful. And so, it wasn't all bad. I was in a rural area where I could go way out in the fields, away from everyone, find some tall grass, build a little nest for myself, and with the cold prairie breeze blowing above me, and of course the grass protecting me from that, and the nice warm sun warming me, I could lie in my nest and feel like I was all by myself. And, and that was okay, because with nobody else to compare myself to, I was all right, But, so it worked out, I guess, but it was, let's just say I wouldn't want to repeat my childhood, and I wouldn't want any other child to have to repeat that childhood. And of course, as I got older, it got into high school and it got worse. Got a whole lot worse, because in the high schools in rural Texas, Texas Panhandle, there's always boys that want to try to impress girls by beating up somebody. And I was the only one that was really safe to be beat up, because they beat me up and never worry about it. They could have had their girlfriend beat me up too. It would have worked just as well. But it was really not a good situation. And at the time, I just felt like God had abandoned me. And it was only later when my mother just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and she finally found an osteopath, chiropractor type of guy that was willing to straighten my back out. My back was terribly bent out of shape. He straightened my back out. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And another doctor advised me that if I would run, that maybe, just maybe, my chest would pop out. My right hand chest was all sunk in almost back to my backbone. And so I started running and running and running, not because I liked running, although I learned to like running, but I ran because I wanted my chest to come out if possible. And it popped out. And so now my chest is pretty much normal now. I mean, you'd have to look very, very carefully to see where it's any different from anybody else's chest. And my backbone's straight. And of course, in the process of straightening my backbone, he also made it very strong, which has turned out to be very good. I never have back problems. Everybody else I know has back problems. I don't. And I did, by the time I was out of high school, I had permanently made up my mind that I was going to have to make it in education. I couldn't do it in day labor. I couldn't be a machinist or a pick and shovel man or something like that. I certainly couldn't be a cowboy. By this time I'd even come to the point that I felt like the horse was the enemy. I didn't want anything to do with horses. And I owned cattle much later, but I didn't ride horses to take care of them. I hired somebody to take care of them. But anyway, it wasn't until I went into service that I really straightened out. I mean, I already had my back straightened out by that time, but I hadn't gained any weight at that time because my body hadn't recuperated to the back straightening, and my chest had popped out. I was still only, and am now, only about 70% of the air capacity of the normal person, but I've learned to adapt to that pretty easily. Well, and of course I had very severe dyslexia, and I had touches of narcolepsy and touches of ADHD. I was very, very lucky, and then in those days they didn't diagnose ADHD, so nobody tried to do anything about it. It worked itself out. And they didn't try to diagnose narcolepsy, so that worked itself out. If there had been people that could diagnose it, they might have decided I had a permanent problem, and I might have bought into it, and I'd still have a problem. But since I didn't know I had a problem, I didn't have a problem. The dyslexia I learned to control. That was hard, but by just constantly working on it, I've got the dyslexia pretty much under control now. If I'm very, very tired, it might show up, but answer to that is don't do anything when you're very, very tired. Get some rest, then do it. But I guess overall, if I had to really make a firm commitment on it, I'd say that in my case uniquely, the childhood experiences I had and even the high school experiences I had, as bad as they were, getting beat up all the time is not a real pleasant thing. But I guess I'd have to say that was a big advantage in my case. Now, it probably would not be an advantage in everybody's case because everyone wouldn't react the way I did. But in my case, since it pushed me into an education, as far as I know, the first person in either side of my family for several hundred years to get an education, because it pushed me into getting an education, and because and all the way up to a doctor's degree, and because it pushed me into using my brain, which caused me to have a considerably higher income than most people in my, let's say, category or in my walk of life. It was an extremely, extremely beneficial thing for me. Although I think I didn't start looking at it that way until I was maybe 40. But looking back, I think that's absolutely right. I think for me alone, any other childhood would have been less advantageous. Now, like I say, I wouldn't want to repeat it. I wouldn't want to go back to high school the way and do this thing, have the same things happen there. And I certainly wouldn't want to have a childhood like I had before. But if I look at the 20 years or so of relatively misery I went through, and look at the subsequent 63 years that were enriched by it, I'd have to say that in the balance, it was the right thing for me. And, you know, it's almost like to get the best quality steel, you have to temper it. You have to put it in give it to a very high temperature, and then you have to give it a shock of a very, very hard quenching operation. And so I was very roughly treated, but I think it changed my character, and in retrospect, in my specific case, not necessarily true of anyone else, it was for the good. I mean, it was the best thing for me. So I guess, as I said, I wouldn't want to repeat it, but I guess I have to say I'm kind of glad it happened that way. I really am. And that kind of sounds like a strange thing. I mean, it has its downside. When I finally got some size, I was in the service, and I went from 129 to 196. So rather sizable change, almost 70-pound change. And I suddenly, for the first time in my life, was fairly strong. And certainly, after all that I had been through, I was certainly focused on doing what I wanted to do. I mean, in other words, it was not a good idea to try to oppose me when I really made up my mind I wanted to do something. So after I got out of the service, I went through a brief period of just being, well, I guess you'd say, not a very good member of society. Like every time I came across one of the guys I knew in high school, I immediately decided to see if I could break him in half. Fortunately, they could all run faster than I could. I'm very good, or used to be a very good long distance runner, not a sprinter. They were all better at sprinting than I was, so they all got away from me. But even some of the larger ones, if I could have caught them, I would have broken them in half. I'm serious about that. I might even have killed one of them. But then I finally realized that was, a no-gain game. And so I gave up on that. I finally decided from now on, this boy's going to be nonviolent, and that's where I am now.